Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports, one of the most highly anticipated videos on the channel each and every year, and that is my official trade deadline predictions, one for every single team in the NBA. If you guys do enjoy the content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. I don't want to waste any more time. You guys clicked on this video, you know exactly what you're hoping to see here, so let's jump into it. With the first team, the Atlanta Hawks, a team that has had some awesome, impressive moments this year. Dyson Daniels has broken out in a big way, and they have the ability to go out and make another splashy type of trade if they want to. Clint Capella is an expiring contract. He has a rather sizable contract. In fact, he is the second highest paid player on the Atlanta Hawks this season, and his contract can be an extremely valuable expiring asset to deal to a variety of different teams. On top of Clint Capella, the Hawks could also mortgage some of their short-term future in terms of draft capital without sacrificing some added long-term flexibility. Remember, they still owe picks out the door to San Antonio from their original DeJounte Murray trade, but they do have 2 first-round picks in 2025, one via the Sacramento Kings, which is top 12 protected, and then also one from the Lakers, which they got from trading DeJounte Murray to New Orleans. They have those 2 assets to theoretically throw into a deal for Clint Capella, and a player who does make some sense could be Cam Johnson. The Brooklyn Nets reportedly wanting 2 first-round picks for their veteran wing who is having a career season for the Nets. He could be a target that could make some sense with Onyeka Okongwu breaking out in a big way this year for the Hawks, especially as of late. Some real big performances from him. He has been outshining Clint Capella in terms of minutes and production on the actual court. With that in mind, Capella not only is a contract that makes sense to move, but also a player that the Hawks, I think, could realistically see themselves moving on from. Now, this would leave them pretty thin at the center spot if they do trade Capella for perimeter talent, but the reason that is my prediction here really stems from the fact that I don't think there's going to be a lot of high caliber centers out in the market. Nick Richards has already been traded at the time I'm now recording this. There's not a lot of caliber, starting caliber specifically, centers out on the market. So you have to turn your attention to more perimeter play. Could the Hawks, who still need a little bit more infusion of playmaking and backcourt play, look maybe at a guy like Lonzo Ball or Colin Sexton, two-way players who do have an impact defensively, especially Lonzo Ball. Lonzo's ability to kind of work both on and off the basketball really stands out to me. And then also Colin Sexton could maybe be a floor lifter for the Hawks when Trae Young's off the floor. He is such an integral part of their offense. Almost honestly, the rest of the Hawks rely on him at such a heavy rate that when Trae Young's not in the game, their team just doesn't look the same. So looking for talent to maybe come off the bench or be other backcourt talent surrounding Trae Young could make some sense. That's where Lonzo and Colin Sexton come in as some potential options. But with a sizable contract like Clint Capella, letting him go into free agency and potentially losing him for nothing or just re-signing him, I'm not sure that's the best way for the Hawks to go, especially when they have these near future first-round picks in 2025 to work with via trade. Now on to my prediction for the Boston Celtics. And not all of these predictions are going to be super sexy. In fact, this one really is not. I think the Celtics stand pat with their championship caliber roster. This team just won the NBA Finals last year, and I think this year they're going through some of the lulls of a regular season as the repeat champion. I think they're going to turn it up come playoff time, but we have seen some faults in the road for the Celtics. Just a tough overtime loss the other night to the Atlanta Hawks. Actually 6-4 in their last 10 games at the time I'm recording this. So even though Boston has been utterly dominant over the last 2-3 years, this Celtics team has seemed prone to some letdowns in the regular season. Now for me, I'm still a very big believer in the Boston Celtics. In fact, I still think that they should be considered the championship favorites, just given their recent experience, the run that they had last year to the NBA Finals, the dominance they showed in the finals over the Dallas Mavericks, and their collection of talent. The ability to keep everybody together from a finals run is almost unparalleled in NBA history, and the Celtics were able to retain essentially everybody, add a first-round pick in Baylor Sherman, who hasn't had a huge role this year, but nonetheless, the Celtics, while their spending has gone up, the wins this season haven't. But come playoff time, I think this team's going to be ready to go, and I don't see them making any big or drastic moves throughout the course of this NBA trade deadline here in 2025, especially since they're a second apron team and are met with a bunch of restrictions to begin with. Then we move on to the Brooklyn Nets, and I think my prediction here is very clear. They're going to trade Cam Johnson and they will stay below the tax line. Currently, at the time I'm recording this, they are $677,000 below the tax line. And for normal human beings, that sounds like a lot of money. In the NBA, that's like a penny. That is such a small amount below the tax line. So pretty much any trade where the Nets are sending out Cam Johnson, at most, the most amount of money I could see them realistically taking back over Cam Johnson's salary amount is an extra $600,000. It would be complete GM president malpractice to go into the tax line with a tanking team. And Sean Marks won't do that. He won't do that to Joe Tsai, the Nets owner. He will not put the Nets into that situation. So that's one, a very easy prediction. And secondly, trading Cam Johnson is also another one that makes sense. And it really stems from Jordi Fernandez. You look at the Nets, who have been already very active this trade season, moving Dennis Schroeder to the Golden State Warriors and also moving Dorian Finney-Smith to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Nets have had a collection of career years. Dennis Schroeder, a real resurgence. Dorian Finney-Smith was shooting the ball so tremendously for Brooklyn. Cam Johnson, in the midst of one of his best seasons, if not just flat out his best season in his NBA career. And a lot of it stems from Jordi Fernandez, who is a tremendous coach and has really been maximizing his players. I think the offensive scheme there, the ball movement, player movement, and the timeliness of that offense has really allowed a lot of these players to excel and elevate their games, upping their trade value this year and making other teams, other contenders extremely interested in adding those players to their roster. So far, the Dennis Schroeder one hasn't worked out great for the Warriors. Dorian Finney-Smith, I thought, was a good addition for the Lakers, but still not one that is going to move the needle a ton for them. I think the Nets have been getting the better of all of these trades, and I think they're lined up very well here to maximize Cam Johnson's value as well. I already talked in this video about them netting potentially 2 first-round picks for him. You think back to the Kevin Durant trade where Brooklyn sent KD to Phoenix. There is a long list of assets that the Nets have been able to extract from that trade. Of course, trading Mikal Bridges and now a potential Cam Johnson trade as well. That list of draft compensation just continues to get longer and longer, making it perhaps one of the best trades in NBA history. A very welcome sight for Brooklyn Nets fans, I'm sure. The Charlotte Hornets, a team that already made their big move, and unfortunately for me, I had that on my graphic before recording, but the trade already occurred. Nick Richards got traded. I knew it was going to happen. Unfortunately, I didn't record it and post it in time, so I had to switch it up here. And I think with the Hornets, when you look at their roster, Grant Williams out for the season. I just don't think Josh Green's going to have a whole bunch of value around the league. Maybe Vasi Micic gets sent somewhere, right? There's a couple of players on this roster that I could see theoretically being included in salary. I could also see Charlotte being a third-team operant in deals where they're trying to help facilitate trades. They have salaries to do so with Josh Green, with Vasi Micic, for example. But really, at the end of the day here, how is this Hornets front office going to be judged? It's going to be judged based on their draft picks. And after trading out Nick Richards, this team is very clearly positioned to be toward the top of the NBA draft once again this year. And to put more talent around Mark Williams, Brandon Miller, and LaMelo Ball, they need to, first of all, pray for lottery luck, and then secondly, draft really well. So honestly, if I was a part of the Hornets front office, if I'm, the head honcho there, every single person in the organization should be watching draft film. Every single person should be evaluating college prospects, international prospects right now, because at the end of the day, the trades that they make this trade deadline, while yes, they could help move the needle a little bit going forward, their current roster is nowhere in a position to net massive draft equity via trade. So attention to detail on the NBA draft is the best way for them to go. And I think this trade deadline may be a small move as a third team, maybe a small move here or there. But for the most part, I think the Hornets have already made their move trading Nick Richards. And I think they should be in a spot here now to be all in on the 2025 draft in a chase for Cooper Flagg at the very top. Now, the Chicago Bulls. A very interesting team and a team that is open for sale. I think the Bulls are going to be perhaps the most active caller at the NBA trade deadline. I think they're going to be calling almost every single team in the league, trying to find deals for any of the following: Zach LaVine, Lonzo Ball, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic. I think there is going to be a limited market for a majority of these players. Just looking at the new CBA restrictions, the way that trades are going to formulate this year, there's not a lot of market for some of these players. Even Nikola Vucevic, who's been having a very good season for himself, kind of a resurgence year after the year he had last year, his $20+ million salary is just very difficult for other teams to get involved with. For example, Phoenix, who has Jusuf Nurkic, they already traded for Nick Richards. It is impossible, essentially, for Phoenix to trade for Nikola Vucevic unless they were to include Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, or Bradley Beal, and we already know, well, that's probably not happening with that no trade clause and all of the second apron rules and restrictions. It's hard to see trades coming to fruition to begin with for some higher salary players. And that kind of applies to Zach LaVine here as well. And then you look at Patrick Williams, a player who's shooting under 40% from the field this season as a forward. The market's just not going to be huge for him. You know, you think about a former 4th overall pick, a player who in his draft class I didn't like that much. I preferred his college teammate Devin Vassell over him significantly. But looking at the allure, what a lot of people have saw was defensive upside, size, length, athleticism, and some on-ball perimeter skills that people thought there was real potential for him to grow into and develop with. And we just haven't really seen that. Injuries along the way and some shortcomings as well have really left Patrick Williams in a weird spot after signing an extension with the Bulls worth $90 million. I just don't know if the market's going to be significant enough for him to actually get moved this trade deadline. Lonzo Ball is an expiring deal. If any of the 4 players on the graphic right now were to get moved, I would say it's Lonzo Ball, and I feel pretty confident in the fact that he probably is the easiest player for the Bulls to trade out of these 4 this trade deadline. Moving on to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think this is a very, very tricky one. In fact, this is the toughest one out of all 30 NBA teams because my brain tells me, look, the Cavaliers, even though they're an all-time great team right now on a 72-73 win pace, they have been nothing short of dominant this season in awesome exhibitions of basketball and team basketball specifically. Their pick and roll game is tremendous. The shooting has been very, very good. The defense has been elite. Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen have been such a good combination, which is honestly a really funny story given Kenny Atkinson was a part of Team France where they went away from playing Victor Wembanyama and Rudy Gobert together coming into the year. I was kind of concerned. Is that going to be a precursor to this Cavs season? It's been the complete opposite, and it's honestly so funny. The development we've seen from some of the Cavs players, Darius Garland's having a tremendous season for himself as well. But my brain tells me, look, they're so close to the tax. They're so close to the tax. They could dip below the tax with one creative trade. They have some draft assets. They have second-round picks to move. They have their 2031 first. And Max Strus has only played in 13 games at the time I'm recording this, so he has not been an integral core piece of their winning, of course. Now, it's not like he's a player they just want to get rid of, but they could trade his $15 million salary, maybe break him up into 2 players, like a $5 million and a $7 million player. They could maybe break him into just one other player, trade him for a slightly cheaper salary, someone making $14 million, $13.5 million. And what they could do is dip below the tax, opening up future flexibility, saving themselves some money now. If you get below that tax line, instead of writing a check to the NBA, you're actually receiving one from the other teams in the tax. And with how far Phoenix and Minnesota and Milwaukee are, that number is not going to be a small one. So if you want to help your owner out a little bit as, a GM, president of basketball operations, dipping below the tax while winning might be a great way to do it. My brain tells me that this is a real possibility, but also my heart's saying, look, the Cavs are so good, they might not want to mess with anything going on there. This is the toughest one of all 30 teams for me. Let me know down in the comment section below what you think, and I want to hear you guys' predictions as well along the way. If you feel strongly about any prediction for any of the 30 teams, comment it down below, and I'm going to be reading every single comment on the channel, just like I always do. Jumping forward here to the Dallas Mavericks, what will Dallas look to do? And with some recent reporting on the Mavericks being willing to include Daniel Gafford in trades, that's one that raises some real questions for me, and I honestly do not believe those reports at all. I think looking at the way the Dallas Mavericks took off after last year's trade deadline, the importance and the factor that having 2 quality centers, 48 minutes of good center play in today's NBA, how valuable is that? I think last year's Minnesota Timberwolves are another great example of that. The Gobert and Towns combination worked tremendously, and a big reason why was when Gobert sat, Towns was in, and when Towns sat, Gobert was in, and together they were also good. And while Dallas doesn't have that together combination between Gafford and Lively, what they have with them both is very reliable center play if one gets into foul trouble, if one's out for a game due to injury, or just when they're going through their natural rotation. And I think trading Daniel Gafford would be extremely short-sighted. Now, does he have some playoff shortcomings? Yes, most traditional inside bigs do. But again, if you're trading Daniel Gafford, you have to be going out and getting some premier player who I think would be just an overall better fit into your lineup. That player for me would be Herb Jones of the New Orleans Pelicans. If you're going to trade Daniel Gafford, you need to get a player of that kind of caliber back, someone who can fit across multiple different lineup constructions, who can be a perimeter stopper for you, a real great nail defender, a help defender in a variety of different situations that opens up other lineup flexibilities. But to me, I just don't think that's going to come to fruition. I don't know if Dallas has the ammunition to actually go land Herb Jones. So for that reason, I think the Mavericks keep Daniel Gafford this trade deadline, despite all of the noise and reports right now stating that Gafford might be on the move. Moving on to the Denver Nuggets, where Russell Westbrook has revitalized his career. The Nuggets do have some salaries, though. As a first apron team, they can still aggregate salaries. And these two players make a lot of sense to kind of pitch together into a deal. Zeke Naji making a little bit over $8.8 million this season, and Dario Saric a little bit over $5 million as well. They have those two players. Packaging them together can get you close to that $14 million mark. And then you also have the 2031 first-round pick to trade. So could Denver go out in this trade season, offer these two pieces together, Zeke Naji and Dario Saric, and their 2031 first, to get a player who can actually help their playoff rotation? I think a wing who can really shoot the ball would be a tremendous addition for them. Now, those players don't grow on trees. There's not a ton of those readily available this NBA trade deadline. But if the Nuggets can find a way to package these two together with a first-round pick, there is some flexibility to be had of improving your actual playoff rotation before the end of the season coming up to this trade deadline. I think Denver, a team that, listen, when you have Nikola Jokic, you should be trying to contend for NBA championships. And if you're not going to be willing to push your chips in when you have arguably the very best player in the world, I'm just not sure what you're trying to do. Yes, trading out picks 7 years from now is pretty scary, but that 2031 first, even though it is a valuable asset in my opinion, for another team, it's one that I think Calvin Booth and the Nuggets could justify giving up in pursuit of a second title with Nikola Jokic as their core centerpiece. Moving on to the Detroit Pistons, a team that has been much better this season, and they have more flexibility than anybody right now. They have $14 million of cap space. They're the only team in the NBA right now with actual, real, usable cap space. And because of that, they have a lot of flexibility. They could go out and absorb contracts. Let's say a team wants to get off of a salary. Detroit could be the team to take in that contract, to harbor that salary. And that was something earlier in the season when this was all a possibility. I thought maybe that's the way Detroit would go about it. However, a lot of winning over the last 2 months or so has put Detroit in a position to actually compete, and I wouldn't say contend quite yet in the Eastern Conference, but to be a serious playoff team. And with Detroit having that in mind, there's a possibility to get involved in this trade market to actually upgrade their roster. Now, they could go a route for a guy like Matisse Thybulle, especially with Jaden Ivey out now, Cade Cunningham really coming into his own as a triple-double threat night in and night out. They could go with a player like a Matisse Thybulle who makes less than this $14 million mark. You slot him into your salary, you fit him in, and it's a done deal. You don't even have to trade out any players, technically. You don't have to do anything special. It would just be, maybe a few second-round picks for a Matisse Thybulle kind of guy, right? That's option one. Now, it doesn't have to be Matisse Thybulle. It could be Robert Williams III of Portland. There's a variety of different players that you could go out and target, right? But we're just talking players who could be roster upgrades into your current iteration of your team. Matisse Thybulle, for example, would be an awesome defensive event creator, someone who plays the passing lanes really well, can also block shots out on the perimeter, and I think would be a very fun synergistic player with either Ron Holland or Ausar Thompson, just given how athletic this team is. The more defensive event creation, the better, because you're going to get out and transition more. You're going to get more easy baskets that way, and I think that would help the players around Cade Cunningham in their offensive production. Or you could go the bigger route where you include a salary like Tim Hardaway Jr., who's making a little bit over $16 million. And then you maybe include one or two little other small salaries into a deal to get to a player like Brandon Ingram, who's making $36 million and could be very readily available this year, depending on what the New Orleans Pelicans look to do. Ingram's on the final year of his deal, making $36 million. The Pelicans have not extended him. There seems to be a real rift between Brandon Ingram and the Pelicans organization right now on what those extension numbers should look like. So he could be very much available, and Detroit could be a team that is ready and willing to jump in on that kind of player, looking to upgrade their offensive talent around Cade Cunningham. We talked about defensive event creation with a guy like Matisse Thybulle. We're just talking raw offensive talent when we're going for a guy like Brandon Ingram. Now, he doesn't have a super high three-point volume. I think this year Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr. have been both big positives next to Cade Cunningham because of the three-point volume. So that's something to consider here as well. Just because Brandon Ingram is a talent upgrade over Tim Hardaway Jr. and some of the other current Pistons forwards and wings doesn't mean he's the cleanest, best fit either moving forward. So I think that's something to consider here. But again, my prediction, they're going to use this $14 million in some way, shape, or form to upgrade their current roster. Talked about a couple of the different possibilities. There's a bunch of different ways Detroit could look to use it, but I don't think it's just to take in and eat a contract anymore. I think it's to go out and get better, improve your roster, and fill some of the void left by Jaden Ivey's leg injury from a couple of weeks ago. Now the Golden State Warriors, a team that started so tremendously and has really fallen off as of late. And for them too, the new apron rules have really left the Warriors in a spot where I just don't see a huge move coming for them. They are hard capped at the first apron. They only have $330,000 of flexibility, which again, that's a drop in the bucket in the NBA. That's not a lot of money. So because of that, I just think it's going to be extremely difficult for them to cobble together the salaries to get a meaningful deal done for a player like Jimmy Butler, or even for a player like Nikola Vucevic. Again, I talked about the Bulls earlier not having a lot of trade options for Vucevic this trade deadline. The Warriors would be the one team that I could see maybe trying to make something work. It would center around probably Buddy Hield's contract, Gary Payton II's contract, and Kevon Looney's contract. But then again, you're having some real difficulties there of, okay, well, what other salary are we getting back from Chicago? How is this all going to piece together? What draft compensation is going out the door to the Bulls? Is it really worth a first-round pick for the Warriors to trade for Vucevic? And you also look at the recent noise around the organization. Steph Curry has kind of set the fire extinguisher off there, kind of slowing down any fires in the Warriors organization by saying, look, we're not going to necessarily burn our assets or trade our assets out the door in an attempt to improve this roster, just given how the season has played out. I think the Warriors, they wanted to be relevant. They wanted to be a good team this year. I just think championship contender is not a feasible expectation for them at this point in time. And as a result, I don't see Mike Dunleavy or the Warriors making a big, drastic move at this trade deadline. The Houston Rockets now on the discussion of what they're going to do. Again, I just see maybe a trade on the margins. Nothing huge yet. You guys know I'm a huge believer that the Rockets are a team maybe destined or poised to strike for someone like Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox. I just don't think that happens at the 2025 NBA trade deadline. Now we do have, a few weeks yet. Things can change rather quickly in the NBA, but my firm prediction right now is that the Rockets maybe explore something like Robert Williams III instead, using some of their expiring salaries, whether that be Jayshawn Tate or Steven Adams, a few of their other pieces, right? You also have Jock Landale, for example. There's a collection of expiring salaries. Jeff Green. Could you piece together some of those expirings and maybe a couple second-round picks or a first-round pick that won't be very valuable into a deal with Portland to get Robert Williams III? He has been very injury-prone, but we know that he has a very good existing relationship with Ime Udoka, who coached him in Boston. The one playoff year that Ime Udoka was coaching the Celtics, they went to the finals, and Robert Williams was a pretty integral piece of that formula. So he could be an awesome defensive off-the-bench big for Udoka behind Alperen Şengün. The Rockets obviously are a team built on their defense, but the offense is coming along as well. Jalen Green has really broken out in 2025 since the start of the new year. He has been nothing short of tremendous. So I think for Houston specifically, if they're going to make a trade, it's nothing huge yet. I think they want to see this young core in the postseason at least once. They have the assets to maybe make a move in the offseason if they want to. maybe a small, meaningful upgrade on the margins is the way that Houston could go. And Robert Williams III is the player that really stands out to me right now as a potential option. The Indiana Pacers here now at this point in time. I think the best thing for them to do, and what I actually predict they'll do, is to stay below the tax line and wait patiently. Right now they are very narrowly below the tax, within a couple of $1 million of the actual tax line. And you look at their contracts going into next season, Andrew Nembhard's going to have a huge payday raise, of course, from his extension he signed last offseason. Miles Turner is an expiring contract, so he's a key piece that the Pacers will probably want to keep around. And you have other mid-sized salaries. Aaron Nesmith, TJ McConnell, of course, Benedict Matherin's rookie contract, Jarris Walker's rookie contract. Isaiah Jackson, unfortunately, injured his Achilles earlier this year. He's an expiring contract. So the Pacers are at a spot right now where, after trading for Thomas Bryant, I don't think that they have a huge move to make. I don't think that they need to go out there and do anything drastic or huge at this point in time. They've caught fire as of late. Halliburton being healthy and looking like himself has really revitalized this team in a lot of ways. And I think for the Pacers, next year or the year after is really when they're going to be ready to strike. They're going to have a collection of long-term assets. They're going to have a bunch of different draft picks to trade. They have all these mid-sized salaries, whether it be Aaron Nesmith, Obi Toppin, Andrew Nembhard, TJ McConnell, whoever they need to include into a trade to get a deal done for another star player to put next to Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. That's the route I expect the Pacers ultimately to go at some point in time. And I'm extremely optimistic for their long-term future as long as they play the waiting game right now and stay patient while waiting for the right player to come along. Now, again, if they did decide to not follow this strategy, someone like Cam Johnson, there's been some reports and rumors, he is someone who does make sense in a vacuum on paper for the Indiana Pacers. Now, again, it comes down to the opportunity cost. If the Pacers trade 2 first-round picks for him, they're going to be rather limited in some of the other future moves that they can make. So it's part of the reason why, if I was the Pacers, I would not trade for Cam Johnson, but he is an upgrade onto their roster right now, so I could understand them looking strongly into that. But it's not exactly what I would do if I was running the Pacers, and it's not what I predict them to do either. I think patience is a virtue, and I think that's what the Pacers are going to exercise this trade deadline. Looking at the Los Angeles Clippers, a team that has been playing a very high-volume, high-usage player who's not very good in Kevin Porter Jr., they need to find a backup offensive initiator behind James Harden, who has been having quietly, maybe not an all-star caliber season, but a near all-star caliber season. It's so tough in the Western Conference to make the all-star games. His per-game averages don't jump off the page quite like that anymore, but his impact is undeniable for the Clippers. And Norm Powell's been tremendous for them as well. When Kawhi Leonard's on the floor and healthy moving forward this season, the Clippers are going to be a serious, real threat. I just think they need to find someone else who can create offense for them, if it's just not James Harden's night or if James Harden's off the court resting. And they have PJ Tucker's salary to do that. $11 million salary. We talked about the Warriors maybe being a team that takes their foot off the gas a bit this trade deadline. Someone like Kyle Anderson, yes, he's not your prototypical point guard. He's not going to be this primary shot creator, offensive initiator in that way. But what he can be is a really unique offensive initiator where maybe there's no time in the playoffs or toward the end of the season where one of James Harden or Kawhi Leonard isn't on the floor. And then with that, you can use Kyle Anderson as kind of your pseudo point guard with Kawhi Leonard, and you can use him as this defensive-minded forward when James Harden's on the floor. And I think that's one of the things about Kyle Anderson that would really attract a team like the Clippers, who are a defensive identity team, a team that's been winning on the back of their defense quite a bit this season under Jeff Van Gundy, who's been doing a great job as a Clippers assistant, by the way. Kyle Anderson, I think, is one of the more underrated defensive players in the league. He has a lot of matchup flexibility. Last year for the Timberwolves, guarded a lot of guards and then also could guard up the lineup quite a bit into some 3s and 4s. And I think really stood out in a big way for the Wolves when they were the top defense in the NBA last season. And this year for the Warriors, listen, the Warriors are a smaller team, a little bit undersized. I think putting Kyle Anderson next to Ivica Zubac and into a lineup with Kawhi Leonard, Nick Batum, with some other defensive-minded guys like Chris Dunn, for example, Kyle Anderson, I think, could really pop off in a big way for them defensively, while also maybe siphoning some of the ball handling, siphoning some of the decision-making away from someone like KPJ, who I just do not think can be in the playoff rotation for the Clippers if they want to have any hope at winning a playoff series in 2025. The Los Angeles Lakers, another team here where desperation might be huge, but I don't see the front office working out of desperation. In fact, I expect the Los Angeles Lakers to hold onto their first round picks and to, unfortunately for LeBron James, not push the chips in at trying to win a championship this year. I think the Lakers, with first-year head coach JJ Redick, probably acknowledge internally that they just are not an inner circle contending team this year. And after making a small move on the margins to go get Dorian Finney-Smith with some second-round picks, I think the best thing for the Lakers to do and what they'll ultimately decide to do is hoard onto their own first-round picks, wait for a player to become available that makes significant sense for them. If Trae Young ever became available, for example, he could be a bridge player post LeBron James to uplift the Lakers organization as a 1A, 1B type player maybe with Anthony Davis. And I think, listen, it's a hard decision here because LeBron James is such a talented player and has such unique longevity in this league. It feels like a cardinal sin to not go in on trying to win a championship while you have this current iteration of LeBron James who, well, yes, he has taken, I think, a noticeable step backward this year from his previous seasons. He's still LeBron James, and he's still a tremendous offensive player, and defensively, when he is engaged and actually exercising his athleticism defensively and his willpower defensively, is still one of the smartest, impactful defenders out in the league. Now, it doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to, of course, and I'm not trying to suggest he's a great defender presently, but it's just hard to not push your chips in. You know, I talked about this with Denver earlier in this video, saying when you have Nikola Jokic, you have a responsibility to try and win. The same still kind of remains true for LeBron, but the Lakers, they're just not a team that I can see winning an NBA Finals this year at all. And because of that, I just don't think the Lakers front office will push their first round picks into trades, and I just don't think there's a real market of players out there either that it makes sense to do that for at this current point in time. The Memphis Grizzlies, they'll be willing to push first round picks into the center, and it's going to be a big trade for Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. Remember, for my Nets prediction, I said they're going to trade Cam Johnson and stay below that tax line, and I think the Grizzlies are the team that ultimately pay the price for Cam Johnson. And it's to fill out their starting lineup with the front court having Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey, and now Cam Johnson. The backcourt featuring both John Morant and Desmond Bane. This is arguably one of, if not the best starting lineups in all of basketball. Now, of course, the Boston Celtics would have a lot to say about that, right? But I still think Memphis, if they're looking to contend, while Jalen Wells has been an awesome rookie for them as a second-round pick, he's been great for the Grizzlies, honestly. I think if you can picture him going into the playoffs in more of a bench role where you're going to rely on him just a little bit less in case there's a little bit of drop-off or, you know, his first ever playoff experience, having a guy like Cam Johnson who has played in NBA Finals games before, has played in Conference Finals games before, has won multiple playoff series or been a part of winning multiple playoff series with the Phoenix Suns specifically, that experience could be huge for the Memphis Grizzlies, a team that, with John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., has yet to make a conference finals berth. And I think Cam Johnson, the type of season he's been having, the caliber of player he is, and the role fit here as an off-ball, catch-and-shoot movement guy who can cut, do a bunch of different things, and is comfortable with the ball in his hands, I think this could be a very unique upgrade for the Memphis Grizzlies, where instead of having to have guys like Jake LaRavia in the game for long stretches of time, getting this upgrade I think would be very meaningful. They can offer Brooklyn a collection of different young players. They have a lot of different draft picks to offer as well. I think the flexibility here to get a trade is enormous for Memphis, and I think the Nets are going to be the team that ultimately tango with them to get a deal done. The Nets have a player the Grizzlies could really use. The Grizzlies have young pieces and draft picks that the Nets want, and I think the two come together for a very good trade ultimately, where Cam Johnson goes to Memphis and is a part of one of the better teams in the entire Western Conference. Now on to the Miami Heat. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler and ultimately the end of his tenure in Miami. If you look at Jimmy Butler's career, things have ended sour in Chicago. Things ended extremely sour in Minnesota. Things did not end very pretty either in Philadelphia, despite being with the 76ers for less than an entire season. And now things are ending brutally in Miami. And Pat Riley, someone who has the court named after him there at the Kaseya Center. Someone who is a living icon within the NBA. You think about his coaching experience, his executive experience. One of the most well-respected, well-known individuals in all of NBA history. And his influence is even far greater than his accomplishments. And for Pat Riley, someone who doesn't have anything to lose, this will not end well, in my opinion, for Jimmy Butler, who does not have a no-trade clause. And Pat Riley is in control here. Now, Jimmy Butler is going to make things tough. He's very good at that. Throughout his career, he has managed to get what he wants in a lot of different ways, forcing his way out of situations and landing in destinations where he feels comfortable, like when he came to the Miami Heat to join forces with Pat Riley. However, we're now at a point in time where both of them are kind of in the wrong, right? Pat Riley had some choice words during press conferences Jimmy Butler didn't like. Jimmy Butler had some actions that Pat Riley clearly did not like either. And now we're at a point where Jimmy Butler's career tenure in Miami is going to end, and it's again going to end sour. And I think for this specifically, the Heat will make a trade of Jimmy Butler. And for someone like Pat Riley, someone who isn't worried about his legacy, someone who isn't worried about having job security, he's not really worried about getting market value for Jimmy Butler. He's more so worried about getting Jimmy Butler off of his team at this point in time. Now, he knows how to deal with media. He knows how to try and milk as much value out of this as possible. He's not going to come out and publicly say, yeah, we want him gone, which is why multiple times publicly he stated the Miami Heat will not trade Jimmy Butler. He's going to at least try and position and leverage to the idea that they could keep Jimmy Butler, right? And Jimmy Butler's market right now is not going to be extremely strong, given Bradley Beal's no trade clause in Phoenix, given Golden State's flaws within paying multiple players in their current tax situation and apron status. There's not going to be this astounding market for Jimmy Butler, and for that reason, the Miami Heat will trade Jimmy Butler for significantly less than you would imagine right now. I'm sure multiple people are thinking first round picks, this, that, and the other thing, promising young players. I don't think the value in this deal is going to be that good for Miami. I think the Heat are going to be more focused on getting expiring contracts, small salary sending out the door, and we're going to see some team, I don't know who it is yet, some team is going to take that stab at Jimmy Butler, take a bet on his talent. Now, it could be a contending team. It could also be a team looking to angle for future moves. There's a bunch of different teams around the league right now that have an enormous collection of future draft assets, and maybe they would picture Jimmy Butler as the first stepping stone into trading for a second star. There's a bunch of different ways for teams to go about this right now. I don't know who will trade for Jimmy Butler, but what I can promise you is he will not be on the Miami Heat after February 6th and the 2025 NBA trade deadline. The Milwaukee Bucks here, a team that, listen, they don't have a lot of flexibility, but what they do have is their 2031 first-round pick to trade and their 2031 second-round pick to trade, and they have Pat Connaughton's contract. Now, the Bucks are a team where, listen, if there is a Jimmy Butler trade, I know I just got done saying that I don't think he'll get traded. The Bucks could be a fascinating one because they do have Chris Middleton, they have Brook Lopez, they have some of these other players. Now, as a second apron team, they can't put together all of these salaries, right? So there are some restrictions in the way for Milwaukee to get a variety of different deals done. But it wouldn't shock me if Middleton got moved as an expiring salary. It wouldn't shock me if Brook Lopez got moved, even though that would probably be one of the more surprising moves of the deadline. Bobby Portis could very well get moved, but ultimately, just looking at Pat Connaughton's role with the Bucks this year, the reduction in minutes and also production this year, makes it very easy to believe that Connaughton's contract, which is a mid-sized deal, with the 2031 first and second round picks, could be shopped around the league to try and get a player who could either help Milwaukee's team defense, maybe a point of attack defender, a guard who can defend out on the perimeter. We saw last year Doc Rivers go after that kind of player with Patrick Beverley. Now, it did not end very well, but I could see Milwaukee still considering some type of similar approach this trade deadline in terms of adding to their team defense or another floor spacer, another shooter. So there's a bunch of different options. Pat Connaughton's a player who very well could get shopped and shipped out the door if a deal does make some sense for Milwaukee to go after, and I think ultimately that is the type of deal that they'll pursue. Not sure if one will come to fruition or not, but we're going to hear a lot of noise and a lot of reports that Pat Connaughton is readily available and the Bucks will want to trade him at the trade deadline. I also see the Bucks very likely moving on from Marjon Beauchamp as well. If you want a real firm prediction, Marjon Beauchamp will get traded this trade deadline for sure. The Minnesota Timberwolves. I don't see any substantial move coming for the Timberwolves this year at the trade deadline, and I know some Wolves fans are going to be disappointed and upset by that, saying, really, we're not trading Julius Randle? The season's just not going as well as last year did. Why did we trade Karl Anthony Towns? What are we doing? Why did we get cheap all of a sudden? I understand all of that, but I think the long-term plan and infrastructure is in place there in Minnesota. Naz Reid, Anthony Edwards, Rob Dillingham, who I think had a real positive game just the other night, and maybe a little bit of a breakout game for him in the loss to Cleveland. I think the Wolves feel good about their long-term future as is, and I think right now with Chris Finch's allegiance to Julius Randle, remember he coached him there in New Orleans as an assistant, now obviously the head coach of him in Minnesota. I just don't see a Julius Randle trade. Rudy Gobert definitely will not get traded. Mike Conley won't get dealt. I think that they really value what he's brought to that organization and that locker room. Jaden McDaniels, of course, is a long-term build-around piece for Minnesota. So ultimately, even though the Wolves, the season hasn't clicked and gone the way that I think a lot of Wolves fans would have wanted, Minnesota, I think internally, and Tim Connolly feels like there's not a substantial move to make. Now, maybe they make another small move like they did last year, trading for like a Monte Morris, a smaller contract, right? But there's just nothing substantial out there that I could realistically see Minnesota doing. So for that reason, I think Minnesota keeps their main core together. Julius Randle will be in Minnesota post-trade deadline. Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert, Anthony Edwards, all of the bunch. Jaden McDaniels, everyone up and down that rotation will be staying in Minnesota past the 2025 NBA trade deadline. And if not, something really crazy has had to have happened at the NBA trade deadline. The New Orleans Pelicans, this one is short and sweet. They're going to trade Brandon Ingram, and in classic, typical Pelicans fashion, they will also find a way to duck below the tax. Last year, they traded Kyra Lewis Jr. That was the most predictable move in the NBA last season. I called it in my trade deadline predictions video last year. And this year, they're going to do essentially the exact same thing, except with a bigger ticket item in Brandon Ingram. We talked about him as a potential target for the Detroit Pistons. I do think there's a better team, a more likely team out there to go actually trade for Brandon Ingram. We'll talk about that in a few graphics. Just wait around for it. But Brandon Ingram will get traded. His $36 million expiring salary kind of puts the Pelicans on the clock here a bit to move on from him. I don't see them having a lot of other leeways to trade a player and get below the tax. So Brandon Ingram's probably the best actual possibility for this. And I think there's a few options around the league in terms of teams that could be interested for him. So stay tuned. We'll be talking about Brandon Ingram here again in just a minute. The New York Knicks, a team that has already made so many big moves, now they're looking for a smaller move, kind of on the margins of the roster. There's been so many reports and rumors about Jericho Sims being traded. He will ultimately be traded. With Mitchell Robinson coming back from injury, the Knicks aren't going to keep Jericho Sims as a fourth center behind, of course, Karl Anthony Towns, Mitch Robinson, Precious Achiuwa. Jericho Sims will just not be their fourth center. So they will trade Jericho Sims and his tiny, small salary, and they're going to look for any perimeter depth player back. They'll maybe attach a second-round pick. Basically, anyone who can play on the wing and shoot the ball a bit will be ultimately what the Knicks try and trade Jericho Sims plus a draft asset for this year. Now, I don't exactly know which player that's going to be yet, but what I can guarantee essentially is Jericho Sims will be traded. Also, I have a little funny story for you guys. Some of you might already know this if you've been watching the channel for a while, but my final ever game in high school, I played against Jericho Sims. We went to overtime against Jericho Sims' team, and then he dunked like 4 times in overtime. It's kind of funny how good NBA players are. Like, Jericho Sims barely gets playtime for a majority of his career. Now, obviously, he's played a bit more this year with some of the Knicks injuries, but my point here is being that, like, he was a freak of nature going up against me, and he doesn't even get run in the NBA, really, which is just a funny story. But Jericho Sims, he'll get traded. Not sure where yet, not sure for who, but it'll probably be Jericho Sims and a second-round pick or two for another small, tiny contract to help the Knicks kind of improve their wing depth or perimeter depth just a little bit at the trade deadline. The Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that everyone's going to speculate. Is it Cam Johnson? Which big trade are they going to finally make? Let's be real here. We're talking about Sam Presti. He's not going to push the chips in, even though he has so many of them. Instead, what he's going to do is he's going to sit there and prey on a trade-needy team and act as a third-team facilitator. He did this last year. He helped Dallas out in a deal for Daniel Gafford. He traded one of his 2024 first-round picks in a deal to help Daniel Gafford get to Dallas. But in the return, so the Wizards got that 2024 pick from OKC. What happened along the way is Dallas gave up a future swap to Oklahoma City. And given the Thunder how good they're going to be for so long, this is what Sam Presti's going to do. He has the ultimate amount of job security. He will never get fired there in Oklahoma City, I'd have to guess. So, with that in mind, OKC, they have the flexibility to wait around on assets. So if it's that 2031 first round pick from the Suns, if it's a long-term future pick from Miami, if it's a 2031 first from Milwaukee, if it's one of Denver's far out picks, if it's a Clippers far out pick where OKC already owns so much of LA's future anyway, if one of these teams wants to make a trade but they don't have the draft capital to get it done, or say the team they're trading with, just say for a hypothetical that they're trading with Detroit, right? If Detroit wants a near first, maybe not Detroit, maybe that's not a great example. Maybe they're trading with Washington, right? If Washington wants a close or more near future first round pick, well, OKC's got a plethora of those in this draft and would in turn trade this 2024 pick, which maybe wouldn't be that good. They'd be willing to trade that and get one of their future picks from one of these, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams, however many you want to count around the league that would need the Thunder's help to get a deal done. If there's any inspiration or hope around the league for teams to make deals, OKC's going to be sniffing around the trade market, looking to get involved as a third team and continue to add future premium assets from teams that are looking for win-now upgrades at the current moment in time. Then we look at the Orlando Magic, a team that I don't think has any panic or desperation at all, but I think they have the flexibility here to explore offensive upgrades around either Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's contract or Cole Anthony's. Cole Anthony's been a smaller part of the rotation this year, of course, has played through the bevy of injuries that the Magic have endured, unfortunately. It's a testament to Jamal Mosley. They continue to win games despite those injuries. KCP just has forgotten how to shoot the ball, really. He's only shooting 31% from three at the time I'm recording this. It really doesn't make that much sense. He's been a very, very good shooter for quite a while in his NBA career. He gets to Orlando and all of a sudden he can't really shoot the ball anymore. I just don't understand it. But what the Magic do have is 2 first-round picks in 2025, one via Denver, and of course Orlando's own first-round pick. The Denver one comes from the Aaron Gordon trade from a few years past. And now with that, they could either package those 2 first-round picks together or trade one each separately. And if they wanted to trade Kentavious Caldwell-Pope already, which maybe they don't actually do that, but they could, right? And they could explore someone like Anthony Simons from Portland. They could go after someone like Colin Sexton from Utah. And while, yes, they're first-round picks, the quality of these first-round picks are not very high. These picks are very likely both going to be in the 20s in the 2025 NBA draft. It doesn't mean you can't find good talent there, but for Orlando, a team that already has so much young talent and a lot of, really good young players already on the roster, whether that be Tristan da Silva, of course, you have at the very top Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs. There's just so much talent in Orlando. Anthony Black's another great example. They don't need some of these first-round picks probably long-term, and hunting for an upgrade who can help them come playoff time, like an Anthony Simons, who I think could be a really great improvement as a shot creator for them in the half court of their offense, or Colin Sexton, who can be kind of this two-way player who can create his own shots, but also has kind of that defensive tenacity, willingness to pick up 94 feet. I think he could fit very well into the Orlando Magic defensive culture there, probably even better than Anthony Simons would fit in that way. Now, Simons has the offensive talent that I think could elevate Orlando in ways that Colin Sexton can't, but those are just 2 names to target. Orlando, don't be surprised if they look to shop these 2 first-round picks and look for offensive upgrades or two-way upgrades over some of their current players getting decently sized salaries in both Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Cole Anthony. The Philadelphia 76ers, a team that the season just has not gone very well for them, what they're going to do is trade KJ Martin. I can guarantee you that. He makes a little bit under $8 million. It's partially non-guaranteed next season. What was a 2-year, $16 million contract. The 76ers, I think there's a lot we can learn here from the whole Paul George signing and the whole fiasco we're seeing here. First of all, injuries suck. We all know that. But what we can learn is letting all of your players go, renouncing rights on a whole bunch of guys to have cap space isn't always the best way to go about team building. And if you look at the 76ers cap table right now, it is almost impossible to find quality trades for them to make, even though they have first round picks, because they don't have any expendable salaries that are significant. KJ Martin is perhaps their most expendable significant salary at a little bit under $8 million this season. And that's problematic. If you want to get involved with a guy making $20, $23, $25, $28 million, you have to have contracts that are sizable enough to trade away. And since Philadelphia renounced guys like Buddy Hield and a whole bunch of other players from last year's roster, they're at a spot where they don't have those contracts. They have Eric Gordon making $3 million. You can't really do anything trade-wise with that Eric Gordon contract to get anything to happen. And what we've learned is the Sixers now don't have a lot of flexibility despite having first-round picks. If they're going to make some type of trade, you'd have to either include Embiid, Maxey, or Paul George. And that seems super counterintuitive after trying to build a big three. You don't want to tear that apart to make a trade. So it just doesn't make any sense. And it's honestly kind of a testament to why we haven't seen the free agency route as much in the last, 10 years, honestly, in the NBA, because teams and players have gotten smarter about, if I sign my extension, I can get more money now, and then I can also just request a trade, and a team that's ready to win will trade for me. And on behalf of that, yes, you maybe don't get to pick your actual destination, but you're probably going into a better landing spot. Think about Donovan Mitchell, for example, in Cleveland. Think about Rudy Gobert, for example, in Minnesota. Teams that have really produced since making those trades. The Wolves went to a conference finals. The Cavaliers are the best team in the league right now by record. Those things have turned out very, very good. The 76ers opened cap space for Paul George. They're not winning very many games. Of course, injuries have played a part. Again, I don't want to overlook that fact, but the sheer lack of depth because of the way that they went about building their roster has been part of the reason why they haven't been able to withstand those injuries. So now they have KJ Martin's contract to trade. They will trade it. I don't exactly know for what. I've looked around at pretty much every player in the league making between $10 and $6 million. There's not a player here that, you press the magic button and it fixes the Philadelphia 76ers if you acquire. There's not that type of player out there for Philly, honestly. I thought going into the offseason that they would have had to have pulled the trigger for Alex Caruso before OKC did. It didn't happen. Philadelphia doesn't have this magic wand to fix all of their issues now, and their roster is kind of in a weird spot. Trading KJ Martin's going to happen. I just don't think it's going to solve all of Philly's issues, though, unfortunately, for Sixers fans. The Phoenix Suns, they already made a big trade for Nick Richards, and I think that's the biggest trade they're going to really be able to make. I ultimately do not believe Bradley Beal will waive his no-trade clause. Now, they do have Jusuf Nurkic's contract to trade. I just don't think there's a lot of value around the league for Jusuf Nurkic right now. Not only has he had a terrible season for Phoenix, he is also on a contract that isn't desirable. It's got an extra year on it, so it's not even an expiring deal. Grayson Allen's 4-year, $70 million deal, I don't see that getting traded either. So when you look around at what the situation is in Phoenix, kind of feels like a logjam, and not one that's a good one. Not, we have too much talent to play. It's, we have players we can't trade. Jusuf Nurkic probably can't get traded. Not sure if Grayson Allen's going to have the market that deserves for him to get traded, so Phoenix will ultimately keep him. And then Bradley Beal, again, part of the biggest issue, not only was it trading for Bradley Beal to begin with, because this was an obvious disaster in the making, but it was also a clear and evident problem that they did not force Bradley Beal to get rid of his no-trade clause. Because now if they wanted to pursue Jimmy Butler, if they want to pursue player X, Y, or Z going forward, not only do you have to overcome the obstacles of actually trading for good talent without draft picks, you also have to overcome the obstacle of asking one of your players to sign off on leaving. And that's really hard. Bradley Beal's already once uprooted his family from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix. Do you think he wants to continue to do that over and over and over again? Probably not. So he's not going to waive his no-trade clause, and I don't think he'll do that this trade deadline, even despite the Suns trying their hardest, moving him to the bench, trying to make Bradley Beal somewhat uncomfortable. He looks fine, settled in. He's getting paid. He's got a very luxurious player option coming up in a few years. Bradley Beal's making his money, and I don't think he's minding the warm weather there in Phoenix either too much. I think the Suns stuck with Bradley Beal past this year's trade deadline. The Portland Trailblazers, a team that I could see going after Brandon Ingram, and that's exactly what we're going to have them do. as my firm prediction, I think the Portland Trailblazers, I've talked about them at length in the past, being the team that makes the most sense for Brandon Ingram. And this is why right here, the Blazers acquire Brandon Ingram in exchange for DeAndre Ayton. The Pelicans, a team that, again, was just very narrowly over the luxury tax earlier when I talked about them, they shave off $4 million in a trade like this, where they send Brandon Ingram and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl out the door for former first overall pick DeAndre Ayton, a player who, since signing his max contract, has not lived up to expectations, has been traded once from Phoenix to Portland, and now will be traded once again from Portland to New Orleans, as well as a second-round pick. You can maybe argue a couple more second-round picks have to be in this deal, given how bad DeAndre Ayton has been throughout a majority of the season, probably a career worst year for him, honestly. And Portland, listen, a team that's not winning right now, this is a talent grab. This is getting off of DeAndre Ayton's contract. This is improving your roster, opening up more minutes for Donovan Clingan to play center moving forward, and kind of getting clarity that, listen, we don't want Ayton's contract. Brandon Ingram might be a player that fits way better. And if Portland could maybe look at moving Anthony Simons as well, they could try and recenter this thing a little bit. Now, Ingram, yes, everyone knows how much of a veteran he is. He's been around the league for a long time. He's still not that old. He's not even close to 30 years old yet. He's in his late to mid 20s. So he's a player who's got, 2 or 3 years left before you even have to start worrying about the end of his prime. So I think an extension with Portland could make some significant sense after a trade like this. And again, the biggest motivating factor here for New Orleans, you get out of the tax completely this year, which is a super important thing. And the Pelicans, who have room to give Trey Murphy III a runway to becoming maybe a star player for them. DeAndre Ayton fills into your center spot next to Yves Missi. You have maybe 48 minutes of okay center play. Yves Missi's awesome. DeAndre Ayton's not very good right now, so I don't want to say 48 minutes of good center play, but okay center play. And again, you're giving a runway here for Trey Murphy III to kind of elevate as a player by giving him more minutes, more run, more touches, more opportunities to be the guy that I think a lot of us know he can be. The Sacramento Kings just keep on winning after firing Mike Brown. And I think Monte McNair, what is he going to do at this trade deadline? He will aggressively decline calls for De'Aaron Fox. And there will be multiple calls placed. Teams like the Houston Rockets, teams like the Miami Heat, maybe even New Orleans themselves, I could see all expressing interest in Sacramento's star point guard. De'Aaron Fox is going to have a lot of value, but he's been playing pretty well for Doug Christie. The whole Kings organization has been playing well for Doug Christie since Mike Brown's firing. And I think Monte McNair is not ready to trade De'Aaron Fox yet at this point in time. Of course, McNair has made some big trades in the past, traded Tyrese Halliburton for Sabonis. He has manned the ship and honestly improved the Kings dramatically in his tenure. So McNair, he is a good GM. Now, he has his shortcomings, of course. I think a lot of Kings fans would be willing to acknowledge that. But ultimately, I think the Kings front office man here would be very, very reluctant to trade De'Aaron Fox, to the point where no deal for De'Aaron Fox occurs this trade deadline, and the Kings kind of stay status quo moving past the February 6th trade deadline this year. The San Antonio Spurs, another team, very Sam Presti-esque here, will be hunting for future draft capital as a third-team prowler, and it all centers around the future of Victor Wembanyama. Look at their collection of assets in the 2030 and 2031 drafts. These are the furthest out assets that teams can trade, and this is what San Antonio already owns. A 2030 first-round pick via Dallas, their own 2030 first-round pick. They have a swap option with Minnesota in 2030. They have a second-round pick in 2030, of course. They have the Cavs second-round pick in 2030. They have the Wolves 2031 first-round pick unprotected from the Rob Dillingham trade. They have swap option rights with Sacramento in 2031. They have their own first-round pick and the 2031 second-round pick. That's all in 2 years. That's all the assets that they have draft-wise. The Spurs plan here, and it's super obvious, and it's super predictable, and it's honestly genius. They know, just like I knew, Victor Wembanyama is a generational player who is going to propel the team to winning, and winning a lot, and winning for a long time. And as a result of that, it will be very hard for the Spurs to continue to replenish premium talent around him. At some point, Wembanyama is going to sign a rookie max extension. Maybe Vassell, who already is on an extension. Some of their players are going to get expensive, right? And they're not going to have top 4, top 5 picks like they did in the 2024 draft where they got Stephon Castle. As a result of that, it is essential for the Spurs to have other teams' assets. And for some reason, teams have been willing to work with them. I don't understand it. But because of this, the Spurs are sitting very, very pretty here, waiting for teams to fall off, waiting for teams to, it just takes one or two teams. It takes one or two seasons for a team to have a bad year. Maybe they're injured. Maybe they have a couple of things go wrong. Maybe a player leaves their organization. And all of a sudden, the Spurs might have a top 5 pick again in 2030 or 2031 or 2028 or 2029. And that's what San Antonio is looking to do. They're opening up as many possible avenues as possible to add young talent along the stretch of Victor Wembanyama's career. They're going to continue to try and extend his prime before his prime even hits. And what I mean by that is they're going to continue adding young talent, continue adding athleticism, shooting, ball handling, playmaking, all of the things you're looking for skill-wise on a basketball court. The Spurs are going to be able to continue adding those things on cheap rookie contracts while the top players, Vassell, Wembanyama, Jeremy Sohan potentially, while all of those players start to get expensive, the Spurs are either ready to strike for a big trade for a guy like Trae Young, or they're adding other rookie contracts along the way as well to surround this team with young talent and kind of follow the Oklahoma City Thunder model that we're seeing right now around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, as guys like Chet Holmgren, J-Dub, and the rest of that young Thunder core continue to be impactful winning players around an MVP caliber guy. That's exactly what the Spurs are doing around Wembanyama, and they're going to continue doing that here at the trade deadline, aggressively working as and operating as a third team in trades this deadline. The Toronto Raptors, a team that is very fascinating. Masai Ujiri always has his unique way of going about things. What I expect them to do is to trade Bruce Brown. That is the very likely trade to make. Bruce Brown, of course, hasn't played a ton this season for a variety of reasons, of course. But it's not just trade Bruce Brown. And that's the thing here for Masai Ujiri specifically. He's going to also look for upgrades and value grabs. And this is what he does typically. He doesn't just buy or sell, which is usually the black or white approach most GMs in the NBA take, right? What he's going to look to do is buy a little bit, sell quite a bit. Sell a little, buy a lot. And, he did that with Jakob Poeltl. When he traded away OG Anunoby, he looked for win-now players like RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, who are a little bit younger than OG Anunoby, of course, but still, guys who aren't just theoretical draft picks in the future, right? They're real NBA players who can have a role on your team now. That's what Toronto does. So he's not going to trade Bruce Brown for just draft picks. He's going to look for some value grab. Now, I have Jake LaRavia on the graphic here. It could be a variety of different young players. Marjon Beauchamp could be a name to watch. Former Milwaukee Bucks first-round pick. We talked about him earlier in this video. Maybe a guy there in Los Angeles like Jalen Hood-Schifino could be a name to watch. There's a collection of different, former first-round picks who haven't really panned out with their original team. That's where I could see Masai Ujiri looking at the trade deadline. The Utah Jazz, a team that they have some veteran talent yet, but I'm not sure they'll have that talent after the trade deadline. Remember back a couple of years ago, Will Hardy's first year coaching the team, the Jazz were winning too much, and then they traded Mike Conley. The end of the season ended horribly for them in a good way so that they could tank a little bit, try and help their draft pick, keep their draft pick. The Jazz are at this point not good enough to even be in the conversation of a play-in spot anymore, right? They've diminished their talent to the point where they're not good. But what they do have still is some veterans that are valuable around the league. We've talked about Colin Sexton multiple times already. Jordan Clarkson also remains an option, $14 million player. He could be a guy that teams look at as a bench creator option, a six-man type of player who could obviously lead a second unit. He could be an option for the Clippers, for example. These types of players, they're not going to net you a ton of assets, but maybe you get one first-round pick for Colin Sexton. Maybe you get, 2 second-round picks for Jordan Clarkson. And the Jazz and Danny Ainge continue to add to their draft collection. Last year they traded Kelly Olynyk. This year they're going to trade one or maybe both of these guys here in Colin Sexton and Jordan Clarkson. I think if anything, Sexton's the most likely to get moved because he's probably going to fetch you more value than Jordan Clarkson would. But nonetheless, I think one of or both of these players gets traded this trade deadline. That leads us to the final team, the Washington Wizards. And I think the Wizards here will be patient sellers and will act as contract harborers. So, listen, right now, a team that's very young, they've been playing, obviously, Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Bub Carrington. they've been playing their rookies a ton of minutes, which could be good for their development. It's not always that way. Playing doesn't always equal development. Look at Michael Carter-Williams as an example of that. But it could be, right? You're giving guys experience and opportunities to grow and learn while being on the court. So that's something the Wizards are affording their young players right now. The other thing that they're doing is losing a lot, keeping themselves toward the top of the draft, hoping to land Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper, for example, right? Right now they're at a spot here where Kyle Kuzma is not going to fetch you a ton, but he's on a descending contract. They don't have to sell him right now for, pennies on the nickel. And normally the saying is pennies on the dollar, right? Kyle Kuzma is not a dollar player in the NBA, in my opinion. So that's why I said pennies on the nickel. You don't want to trade him for 1 second-round pick when you could get maybe 3 later. As his contract descends, he gets a little bit cheaper. Maybe he plays a little bit better next season. The Wizards could trade him. The only reason to trade him right now is if you think that the value is about as good as you're going to get for him long-term anyway. That's when you should trade him. So the Wizards right now, if they don't trade Kyle Kuzma, nothing bad is going to happen. They're not going to win too many games. Or Kyle Kuzma is not contributing to winning right now. Malcolm Brogdon, they can trade for maybe a second-round pick. They're not these are not deals that are going to change their franchise one way or another if they make them, which is why there's no pressure here for Washington. They already made their big move. It was trading Bradley Beal. The fact that they got off of that right away with Michael Winger and Will Dawkins is already a home run. Everything after that is just gravy for the Washington Wizards, which is why I'm not really pressured for them to make moves. They don't have good players on their roster right now. They don't have a lot of value. Jordan Poole's not going to get traded. Jonas Valanciunas maybe could get traded, right? They don't have players that are going to net a first-round pick. They don't have players who are going to net 4, 5, 6 second-rounders, right? They have guys who can maybe get you 2 second-round picks. Maybe 3 with Kyle Kuzma. We'll see. But what they could do is maybe say, okay, well, maybe we'll work as a third team. And, no one wants Jusuf Nurkic's contract? Yeah, we'll bring that here to Washington. That's fine. And you send Malcolm Brogdon's contract somewhere else, right? You get some type of deal done here where you're helping Team X and Team Y out as Team Z in a 3-team trade. And that's exactly what I think the Washington Wizards are going to be able to do. If a team wants Kyle Kuzma, sure, go ahead and try and make a trade. If a team wants Malcolm Brogdon or Jonas Valanciunas, go ahead, try and make a trade. But if the offers aren't very good, just don't even sweat it. Don't worry about it. It doesn't really matter that much, honestly. You're not going to get great value for those players to begin with. And with Kuzma's descending contract especially, you don't have to feel pressured. You have the offseason to try and trade him. You're still losing games. You're putting yourself in position for a good pick here at the top of the draft in 2025. There's really no pressure. Try and help some teams out. See if you can get a couple draft assets for eating a bad contract like Jusuf Nurkic is. And if so, that's fantastic. If not, again, no sweat, no bummer. I think the Wizards are doing everything right now, which includes losing. And I continue to say that about Michael Winger, Will Dawkins. I don't think a lot of people see the long-term plan here for the Wizards like I do. I know Wizards fans are bought into the rebuild, but I'm telling you, everything's going smoothly right now. You're losing games. There's no pressure to do anything. There's no real risk of screwing anything up big time right now. The Wizards are in a great spot. Everything is going smoothly for Washington right now. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy the video today. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more. Covered all 30 NBA teams in this one. Let me know your trade predictions down below. Go give us a follow on Twitter as well. Links in the description. We'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.